GT racing for a budding sports car enthusiast can look pretty confusing. Across the globe, there seems to be an endless variety of tin-top racing categories based on bewinged versions of your favourite unattainable depreciating liabilities. But in actual fact, it's pretty straightforward once you get your head around it. So never fear, for Jack McKenzie is here with your guide to GT racing. Let's start with GT1. GT1 was essentially the hydra from which the heads of all GT categories of the modern era grew from. After the collapse of the World Sports Car Championship after the 1992 season, various smaller sports car series cropped up to fill the void. One of these series was the BPR Global GT series, which started in 1994, which created the GT1 class. This class was initially made up of race-going versions of road cars such as the Porsche 911 RSR and the Ferrari F40 GTE. The class was also introduced at Le Mans the same year. However, the finer details of the regulations hadn't exactly been sorted yet. As is fairly common knowledge nowadays, GT cars are generally supposed to have a road-going equivalent in order to go racing, and GT1 was no exception. However, the minimum number of equivalent road cars that had to be produced was 1. A few years prior in 1991, Jochen Dauer had purchased 5 Porsche 962 chassis and had built a road-going version of Porsche's Group C prototype. I think you can see where this is going, and honestly the Dauer 962 deserves its own video, but basically Porsche effectively converted a race car to a road car, and then back to a race car. The Dauer 962 was 12 seconds faster in practice for Le Mans than its nearest GT1 competitor, and eventually went on to win the GT1 class and the race outright. Throughout the 1990s, this happened several times with numerous manufacturers. Rules were later introduced to mandate that a minimum of 25 road cars had to be built. But the manufacturers only doubled down, with cars such as the Porsche 911 GT1, the Mercedes CLK GTR, and the McLaren F1 GTR Longtail gracing circuits across the globe. Eventually, costs spiraled out of control, and the GT1 class, in the guise of these crazy homologation specials, went the way of the dodo in 1998. The GT1 name was later used in the FIA GT Championship from 2000 to 2011, but this new class bore little resemblance to what GT1 had once been, essentially becoming a category more along the lines of the typical GT cars you see today. However, the important thing to note for GT racing newbies is that GT1 no longer exists. So if you're trying to find a modern equivalent of a GT1 category, you won't really find one, not one wearing the GT1 logo anyway. So GT1 is completely irrelevant. We're off to a brilliant start. But in all seriousness, the GT1 class gave rise to numerous other GT variants, which we will now go through. Let's start with LMGTE. GTE, as it's known in the WEC and the European Le Mans Series, or GTLM as it was known in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship, is arguably the top of the GT ladder as it currently stands. These cars were once known as GT2, but don't confuse them with the current GT2 cars, we'll get to those later. These cars are faster, rarer, and more expensive than GT3 cars. Most of the time, there aren't too many noticeable differences between LMGTE and their GT3 counterparts. But there are a number of small differences, such as a bit more power, better tyres, some aero differences, and certain balance of performance settings that give LMGTE cars as much as a 6-second pace advantage around circuits like Spa. Some of the notable cars that have been used in this class include the Ford GTLM, the Ferrari 488 GTE, the Porsche 911 RSR, and the Big Mate GTE. LMGTE is used in 3 series across the globe. The IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship uses, or rather used, LMGTE cars in a class called GTLM. This class was made up of mainly factory-run efforts with pro driver lineups. The reason I say was is something I'll get to in a minute. The WEC class is known as GTE and is split into GTE Pro and GTE AM. The Pro class is made up of factory-supported entries with pro drivers making up the driver lineups, as well as cars that are the spec of the current year. GTE AM uses 1-year-old cars and features privateer teams with a mix of pro and AM drivers. The European Le Mans Series, which is a step down on the WEC ladder, also uses the class with privateer entries. However, IMSA has already had its final season with GTLM, and the WEC plans to phase out the GTE class by the 2024 season. The racing in LMGTE has been nothing short of amazing. However, the costs are high and dwindling car counts have forced the controlling interests in the world of motorsport to pull the plug. The LMGTE classes will eventually be entirely replaced by the GT3 class, which leads us nicely into our next topic. GT3 is one of, if not the most popular GT category in the world. The class is used in almost countless series across the globe, including the GT World Challenge, British GT, and most recently now in DTM. The category is rich with manufacturers such as Audi, Porsche, Lamborghini, Ferrari, BMW, Aston Martin, and other prestigious sports car and supercar manufacturers. GT3 grids are made up of privateer teams, and what I'm going to call pseudo-privateer teams, which are privateer teams but they get leg-ups from the factory, such as technical support and being provided with factory drivers. GT3 cars are substantially cheaper than LMGTE cars, but are not quite as fast. There are a few variations of GT3. In IMSA, GT3 is referred to GTD, short for GT Daytona, which, as of 2022, will be split into two different classes, GTE Pro and GTD. GTD is essentially just a normal GT3 class, while GTD Pro will replace GTLM as IMSA's top GT class and will feature pro driver lineups and factory-supported entries. The BOP for the two classes may also be different, or at the very least, will be managed independently in IMSA's words. In Super GT in Japan, GT3 is part of a class called GT300, which is made up of three subcategories, which we'll cover later in the video. More often than not, if there is an endurance race featuring GT cars, be it the Bathurst 12-hour, the Spa 24-hour, the Suzuka 10-hour, etc., outside of IMSA and the WEC, there will most likely be GT3 cars on the grid. Now, here's where it gets slightly confusing. GT2 is a new class designed for amateurs, however, it doesn't really have any relation to the original GT2 class that later became LMGTE. These types of cars are used in the European GT2 series, which is aimed at gentleman drivers. Generally, the grid is made up of cars such as the Porsche 911 GT2 Club Sport, the Audi R8 GT2, and the Brabham BT62 GT2. They have more power than GT3 cars, but less downforce, as gentleman drivers often struggle with high downforce cars, and therefore, despite having more power, are actually easier to drive than a GT3 car. GT2 cars are slower than GT3 cars. Around Misano, the fastest GT2 car in qualifying in the 2021 European Series was about 5 seconds slower than the fastest car in the GT World Challenge GT3 event the same year. This class is very new, quite small and quite niche, so you don't need to worry too much about the new set of GT2 regulations. Moving on to GT4. This is where the order is restored again. GT4 cars are a step down from GT3. GT4 cars are used in a variety of championships and racing events across the world, including the GT4 European Series, the GT World Challenge Asia, and British GT. GT4 cars are essentially road cars that have been zooped up to the spec of a racing car, sharing approximately 60% of its components with its road-going counterpart. They are distinguishable from GT3 cars aesthetically by their significant aero differences, as they have significantly less downforce than a GT3 car and less power. As GT3 became more and more of a professional category, GT4 rose as a prominent and significantly less expensive category for amateur, gentlemen, and up-and-coming racing drivers. Typically, cars that are featured on GT4 grids include the Porsche Cayman GT4 Club Sport, the Aston Martin Vantage GT4, and the BMW M4 GT4. Let's talk about a few more niche GT categories. A few of these are mainly found in Super GT. First off, there's GT500. If you consider these things GT cars, they are currently the fastest GT cars in the world. However, the reason I say if you count them is because they aren't really GT cars. GT500 cars are essentially silhouette cars that vaguely look like their road-going counterparts, but have no relationship to them. In fact, they actually share the same technical regulations with what DTM still would have been had it not had to switch to GT3. Anyway, these things are fast, and are actually able to rival older LMP1 and Indy cars on pace. GT500 is however only used in Super GT as of the time of writing. I also mentioned GT300 before. GT300 is featured in Super GT as a second class alongside GT500. As mentioned, it's made up of GT3 cars as well as two other subcategories. The first is just GT300, or previously and more commonly known as JAF GT300. JAF GT300 cars use the cabin of a normal road-going car, but have an entirely new racing car built around them. Examples of these include the Subaru BRZ, the Lotus Exige, and the APR Toyota Prius, which I made a video on about 2 years ago. The other type of car that is used is a mother chassis car, which features a spec chassis with the body of a road car effectively molded to it. These include the Lotus Evora, the Toyota 86, and the Toyota Mark X. There are also a number of one-make series that use some form of GT car. There's the Porsche Carrera Cup, which uses a racing version of the Porsche 911 GT3. However, this is not actually a real GT3 car. This is a Porsche Cup car, so it's not related to the GT3 category really in any way. There's the Ferrari Challenge, which uses a racing version of whatever Ferrari's V8 road car happens to be at the time. There's the Lamborghini Super Trofeo, which is a similar idea to the Ferrari Challenge, but uses a racing version of the Huracan. Aston Martin was set to run a one-make series with the Vantage as well, but that seems to have faded into obscurity as far as I can tell since 2019. Audi actually run a one-make series called the R8 LMS Cup, but they actually use the full-fat GT3 car for these events. And that's pretty much all of the relevant GT formulas that see active competition in 2021. Yes, I know it's a lot to take in. However, the more sports car racing you watch, the more apparent the various differences in the various classes will become. Just think, a few 24-hour races and you'll be joining the cool club with absolute chads such as myself. And on that note, it's time to end. All the socials are in the description below, so if you like what you see, please like, comment, and subscribe. It boosts the popularity of the channel. It gets more content like this out to a greater number of people. Also, if you do leave a comment in the comments below, I will most likely respond to you, so you may as well say something. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.